improve color prints from Photoshop. How to improve color prints from Photoshop. Who is this document for? By the way, this document provides basic instructions for people who work with RGB images and whether created in Photoshop or captured with a digital camera or a scanner, and wish to print their images on an inkjet printer. And this document, by the way, doesn't address the needs of people who need measurable color accuracy and only wish to post their images to the web and print their images by sending them to an online service, and are preparing images for a printing press and work with images in a CMYK color mode. And what is color management? What about the color management? By the way, color management refers to the technology and the process used to ensure that colors are presented as closely as possible to the way they are intended on multiple devices, by the way. And no display device or printer can show the range of brightness and color that the human eye can see. And no two devices, including different kinds of printing paper, and display exactly the same range of brightness and color. And further, different devices, by the way, of the same kind respond differently. And if you unplug one model of monitor and plug in another without changing any software setting, and images will look different on the new monitor. And if you change paper in your printer without changing any software setting, and images will look different on the new paper, by the way. And color management addresses these issues. You can get quite good results with minimal equipment and a small investment of time in some simple procedures. And if you require results with extreme and measurable accuracy, more complex procedures and equipment are required, by the way. This document is built strongly toward the simple end of that skill, and color management can get you as close as physics allows, but there will always be a difference between monitor and print and see blue. And most importantly, color management, by the way, makes that difference consistent and predictable. Your prints won't be green sometimes, and pink other times, and unpredictable dark or light. So what are color profiles? What are color profiles? What about the color profiles? By the way, color management is based on the use of color profiles for our purposes. And there are two kinds of color profiles, by the way. We have steps. Step number 1. Device profiles are associated with a device such as a display or a printer and specific ink and paper. And they describe, by the way, how that device displays color, including which colors it can and can't display. Step number 2. Working profiles are associated with a document in Photoshop, such as an image captured by a digital camera, and they describe how the RGB values in the document correspond to the actual colors that we see, and determines which colors can be represented in the document. And the working profile of a document is set when the document is created, by the way, whether it's a JPG file from a digital camera or a scanner. And a new document created in Photoshop, or a document created by opening a digital camera raw image in Adobe Camera Raw. And the two most common working profiles are RGB and Adobe RGB. And number 1, the Pro Photo RGB. This color, by the way, space is used by people who want to make sure that they are retaining all the color information possible from their image captures. And this is one of those you probably only want to use if you already know why you want to use it, and the features, and is more appropriate for highest end printers. And the most important thing to know about using Pro Photo RGB as a working space is that to avoid paying for those extra colors with a greater risk of blending colors than even Adobe RGB, including a relatively small slice of colors that high-end inkjet printers can print that can't be displayed on any output device or printer. and even more colors that humans can see that, but that can't be captured, by the way, with any input device or displayed by any output device. And what's the use of all these colors if you can't display or print them? By the way, first, you can be sure you haven't thrown away any information that your camera captured until you absolutely must when you output the file. For example, you could make a big hue and saturation, a change that moves previously, and unviewable and unprintable range of publish rates into a range of deep blues that can be displayed. Or you might perform a sequence of editing steps that temporarily create extreme and unprintable colors and then later restore them to a printable range. And say by boosting overall color saturation and then cutting it back in specific areas. And having all those extra colors, by the way, lets you do this without destroying color differences in the image. But Pro Photo RGB comes with a cost. To avoid banding, you should work in 16-byte mode, and which doubles file sizes and memory requirements and operations times. Most Photoshop operations are available, by the way, in 16-byte mode, but many of the creative filter operations are not. And Adobe RGB can represent more colors, by the way, than RGB, especially including more saturated colors that inkjet printers can print. This profile, by the way, is most appropriate for mid-range printers. And so if you plan to print your images on an inkjet printer, you may wish to use Adobe RGB as your working space. And you do this by setting your digital camera or scanner software to output Adobe RGB files, and setting the output setting within Adobe Camera Raw to output Adobe RGB files, or if creating documents from scratch in Photoshop, and selecting Adobe RGB from the color profile pop-up in the advanced text section of the new document dialog box. And RGB can represent fewer colors, by the way, than Adobe RGB, and inkjet printers can print many of those colors, by the way. This profile is best for all in one printers, and that includes a scanner and or fax. So if you use RGB, you will never see some of the more saturated colors that your digital camera or scanner can capture and your printer could print. But RGB does include the vast majority of colors in the vast majority of images, and most monitors connected to the internet are not color managed in any way. But they have device profiles, by the way, that are close to RGB, and many online print services require files that they print to have a working profile of RGB. That means that for files to be posted on the internet or sent to such an online service, you should either use a working space of RGB or convert the file to RGB before posting or sending it. And you can convert a document to RGB either by choosing Edit, then choose Convert to Profile, and then choose RGB as the destination space, and leave other settings as they are, or by selecting the Convert to RGB a checkbox in the Save for Web and Devices dialog when saving a JPG for the web. So what about tips for better color prints? Here are some fundamental tips for color management, by the way, and the first two being the most important. Set up a reasonable and consistent lighting environment for the monitor you use for editing. By the way, you can low lighting that doesn't vary much by time of day and has no light sources falling directly on the screen. It's ideal, by the way. You don't want to see reflections of lights or bright objects in the screen when it's off. And conversely, the worst possible setup would be one in which the sun shines on your monitor in the morning and in your face in the afternoon. So what about profile and calibrate the monitor every 6 months or so? By the way, even the least expensive modern monitor calibrators under $150 will produce, by the way, more accurate and consistent results than the software calibration functions built into the Mac and Windows operating systems. And in turn, those will produce, by the way, better results than no calibrating your monitor at all. And whichever method you use, the result will be a profile of your monitor with those settings. And the next time you launch Photoshop, it will use, by the way, your newly created profile. And don't change the setting on your monitor after you profile it. And especially, don't change brightness or contrast or color setting. And if you do change setting or significantly, it changes the lighting environment, and you should repeat the profiling process. And what about the built-in screens of laptops are not ideal for obtaining good color matches with prints. By the way, good color management requires a monitor that has been profiled. Its controls must be set the same way, by the way, as when the profile was created, and laptop screens can be more non-uniform and with different color and brightness in different parts of the screen, and then high quality desktop monitors, and they are set very bright and or with brightness automatically varying based on the ambient light, and that is great. That is great, by the way, great for web browsing in bright light and coffee shops. But your print, by the way, will always look dark or worse, and sometimes okay, and sometimes a little too dark, and sometimes for too dark. And by the way, laptop screens, however, have improved greatly over the last several years, by the way. And if you plan to use your laptop screen for editing images to be printed, and if the calibration device or built-in software doesn't guide you to a particular brightness level, and try about 1 and set to 1 and have the maximum brightness level, and whenever you edit images and return the display to the setting, or you will be frustrated by poor and unpredictable results. And make sure you have profiles for the printer and paper combinations you will be using. And do this when you first start using a new kind of printer paper. And after that, most inkjet printers today, especially ones meant for imaging rather than business use, and come with reasonably good profiles for various types of paper made by the printer manufacturer. And those profiles are installed, by the way, along with the printer software. And if you are using a new kind of paper, or a paper that isn't made by the printer manufacturer, you will have to obtain a profile from the paper manufacturer website or another source. So what about don't use cheap ink in your inkjet printer? Don't use cheap ink in your inkjet printer. Inkjet ink is expensive, by the way, but for low volume and high quality printing, there is no easy budget alternative to the printer manufacturer ink, and the safe budget replacement ink for word processing documents and spreadsheets with graphics for color accuracy and consistency. And use either the printer manufacturer ink or a specialty imaging ink such as that made by Leeson. And you can't use of specialty ink will also require custom profiles, and the printer profile is specific to the combination of printer ink and paper. And inexpensive store brand inks carry a high risk of poor and variable color results and significantly lowered print longevity. And what about prepare a lighting environment near your monitor for viewing prints? Prepare a lighting environment near your monitor for viewing prints. Do this once when you set up your computer workspace. And also, you need a space near your monitor that has light suitable for viewing the print, and preferably similar to the light in which it will eventually be viewed, and preferably near the monitor so you can look from one to the other. And generally, that won't be direct, by the way, sunlight, and which would make it hard to see your monitor anyway, and it won't be pitch darkness, and which might be tempting for viewing your monitor, and by then you can't see your print. And it's often best not to hold the print up right next to the monitor, because if there is good light for print viewing in that position. And by the way, there is probably light reflecting off the monitor, which is bad on the desk to one side is ideal. And no matter what you do, your print will never match, by the way, your monitor exactly, because the monitor is emitting light and the print is reflecting light. And after that, the print will look somewhat different depending on the light in which is viewed. It will look different under light, in indirect sunlight, and fluorescence. And the monitor and the print can't represent, by the way, all the same colors, nor the same range of brightness from light to dark. For example, the monitor can likely produce some deep blues and reddish purples that your printer can't print, especially if you are printing on matte paper. And the monitor can show a hardly greater brightness difference from black to white than can the printer. Again, especially if you are printing on matte paper, the printer can probably print metal tone and deep blue greens and greens that the monitor can't display, by the way. And the color management software modifies many of the colors in the document to provide the best overall results on each device. It doesn't just take the colors, by the way, that are too saturated to represent on a particular device and replace them with the closest color that can be shown, and that would eliminate, by the way, all detail in colors near the extremes of the device's capabilities. Instead, it shifts many colors subtly to preserve overall appearance. And how to use soft proofing to get a better idea of what your print will look like. Do this as desired or each time before you print. And by the way, if you have celebrated your monitor, what Photoshop is showing you on the screen is the most accurate representation possible of your document. And if you then print that document using an appropriate profile, it will print, by the way, the most accurate representation of your document that the printer can print, because of the factors listed above. Those will usually be quite different, by the way. And instead of having Photoshop show the most accurate possible representation of your document on the screen, it can show the most accurate, by the way, possible representation of what the print will look like, and taking into account the colors your printer can't print, and the decreased range of dark to light tones that the printer can produce. Because of these differences, a soft proof, by the way, on-screen preview of print colors will always look duller than the original image, and you may want to use this information to increase the contrast or saturation of certain areas of your image to compensate. And so obviously if a color isn't there because the printer can't print it, nothing you can do to the file will create that color in the print. This preview, by the way, is still limited by the lighting environment, and plus the fact that there are colors the printer can print, by the way, that the monitor can't display, but it will give you a better idea of what the print will look like than the normal and the best possible image of the document display. And to see a soft proof of your document, you should choose view firstly, then choose proof setup, then choose custom and set the dialog items as follows. We have many steps. The first step, device to simulate, pick the profile for the printer and the paper combination you want to proof. And after that, preserve RGB, numbers, deselected. After that, rendering intent and pre-capture or relative colorimetric. You usually won't see much difference between these, but the ones So one you choose should match the one you pick in the print dialog when you print the document. And next, black point compensation selected, and simulate paper color selected, and after that simulate ink black selected also, and then click OK to finalize. And by the way, this prepares setting for this particular paper and printer combination and turns on soft proofing. To toggle soft proofing for this setup and on and off, you should choose view firstly, then choose proof colors, and you can perform any editing operation while soft proofing is on.